Thomas had been looking forward to the wedding from the moment he first heard his daughter was engaged. Not because of the flowers, or the dancing, or the formalities. He'd never been a man for show. But because it was her day. His little girl. His only child. He remembered when she used to run barefoot through the backyard, pigtails flying, shouting, "Daddy, look at me." She'd beg him to twirl her around until they both collapsed into the grass, laughing like fools under the sky. Back then, she believed her father could fix anything, a broken toy, a scraped knee, even the monsters under the bed. Years had passed, of course. Life got complicated. She grew up. He grew older. And though time had added distance, Thomas still believed their bond was unbreakable. So when neighbors began murmuring about the big day coming up, he smiled to himself. He figured the invitation was just delayed. Maybe she was busy, overwhelmed with plans. That was her way. She tried to handle everything on her own, just like her mother had. But days passed, then weeks. No card in the mail, no phone call, no knock at the door, just silence. It was an old friend, Pete from the barber shop, who finally let it slip. "Heard your daughter's wedding's this Saturday. Must be proud, Tom." Thomas froze. His hands went still mid-shave. He forced a smile. "Yeah, proud." He went home, sat in the living room, and stared at the old photo on the mantel. His daughter at 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, hugging a teddy bear with his name stitched into it. Daddy's girl. That night, he didn't eat, didn't sleep. He just sat there, listening to the hum of the fridge and the ache of his own thoughts. Why hadn't she called? What had he done? He played every moment back in his head, every word, every disagreement, every mistake he might have made as a father. He wondered if he'd been too hard on her, or maybe not hard enough. But no matter how much he searched, he couldn't find a reason big enough to explain being left out. Not just of a party, but of a moment fathers dream of. A moment he'd held on to through every sacrifice, every lonely holiday, every night he worked double shifts just to keep the lights on after his wife passed. And now, the lights were on. But the room felt darker than ever. He reached for his late wife's shawl that still hung on the back of her favorite chair. He pressed it to his chest like it could somehow answer him. "Can you believe this, Maggie?" he whispered. "Our baby girl, getting married. And we're not even invited. And for the first time in many, many years." Thomas wept. Not because he was angry, but because he was broken in a place only a father could understand. It didn't happen all at once. At first, Thomas thought maybe he'd imagined it. The stiff handshake, the tight smile, the way Aaron, his daughter's fiancé, avoided eye contact like the old man was a stain he couldn't scrub out of the picture. But time has a way of exposing what words try to hide. Aaron didn't like him. That much was clear. He was everything Thomas wasn't. Polished. Ambitious. Always dressed like he was on his way to impress somebody important. The kind of man who said "sir" without meaning it, who smiled like it was part of the performance, not the connection. Thomas wasn't blind. He'd seen that look before, the one that said, "You're from another time, another class. You're not good enough." He saw it in Aaron's eyes every time he looked at the cracked walls of Thomas's house, or at the oil under his fingernails, or at the rusted toolbox by the front porch. To Aaron, Thomas wasn't just a man, he was a reminder. A reminder that the woman he loved came from a world he was trying to leave behind. Still, Thomas tried. He kept showing up, kept asking how the wedding plans were going, kept fixing little things around his daughter's apartment when they needed it. Once, he even offered Aaron an old watch his wife had given him, just as a gesture, a bridge. Aaron took the watch, said thanks, but never wore it. The final crack came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, long before the wedding. Thomas had stopped by unannounced, something he'd done 100 times before when his daughter lived alone. She was home, but her voice trembled when she opened the door. And behind her, Thomas heard it, the sound of raised voices, sharp words, control wrapped in charm. Aaron had been yelling, not loud enough for the neighbors, but loud enough for Thomas to hear. "What's going on?" Thomas asked gently, eyes narrowing, heart tightening. His daughter hesitated. She looked at Aaron, then at the floor. "It's nothing, Dad," she said quickly. "Just stress." Thomas had seen enough to know when nothing meant everything. He stepped forward, calm but firm. "Don't you ever raise your voice at her again," he said, looking Aaron dead in the eyes. That was it. The moment it all shifted. Aaron's smile vanished. "You don't get to tell me how to run my relationship," he snapped. "You're not her keeper." "I'm her father," Thomas said, voice low and steady. "And I've buried one woman I loved. I won't stand by and watch another one suffer." Aaron didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. From that day on, there was a wall. Invisible, but thick as stone. Thomas was no longer the father-in-law. He was the threat, the watchdog, the reminder that Aaron couldn't control everything, not as long as her father still had a voice. Later that week, Thomas tried to talk to his daughter again. She changed the subject, said things were fine, told him not to worry so much. But her eyes were tired, her laughter forced. He knew what was happening, and Aaron knew he knew. So when the wedding was planned, when the invitations were printed and sealed, Thomas's name was left off the list, not by accident, but by design. The morning of the wedding came quietly. The sun rose like any other day, but for Thomas, it felt like a funeral. Not because someone had died, but because something had been buried. He sat at the edge of his bed in the silence of a house that had once been filled with laughter, tiny footsteps, and lullabies. Now, only memories echoed off the old walls. He had ironed his shirt the night before, an old navy blue dress shirt, the kind his wife used to say brought out the color in his eyes. His suit jacket was a little tight around the middle now, but it still held the scent of the cologne he wore on important days, weddings, baptisms, funerals. He ran a comb through his thinning gray hair and looked in the mirror. "This should have been the proudest day of my life," he whispered. "Should have been holding her arm, walking her down the aisle." But the invitation had never come. The silence had stayed loud. And so he sat, dressed for a wedding he had no place in. He didn't eat, couldn't. Instead, he pulled out an old photo album and flipped through it. There she was. His daughter, age 3, in a tiny white dress and plastic tiara, holding a bouquet of dandelions. She had made him sit on the porch while she walked toward him. "Play Here Comes the Bride, Daddy," she had squealed. She had always dreamed of her wedding day, but never once had he imagined that when it finally came, he would be a ghost in it. By noon, the ache was too much. He couldn't just sit there. So he grabbed his keys, got in the old pickup truck that had carried their family through years of scraped knees and emergency grocery runs. He didn't know what he was planning. Maybe nothing. Maybe just to see her. The church was beautiful. White ribbons hung from the gate. Guests in fine clothes walked up the steps, laughing, greeting each other. Cameras flashed. Thomas parked across the street, behind the thick cover of a tree, hidden like shame. And then the doors opened. There she was, his daughter, his baby girl, radiant, glowing, a vision in white. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. His eyes welled instantly. She looked just like her mother did on their wedding day, grace in motion. He watched as Aaron reached out and took her hand. Thomas clenched his jaw, but he didn't look away. He stood there as the bells rang, as the people cheered, as the doors of the church closed behind her. No one saw him. No one knew. But he was there, even if she didn't know it. Even if he wasn't allowed inside. Even if his name wasn't on the guest list. He was there because fathers don't disappear. Not real ones. Not the kind who raised a girl through storm and sun, who held her through heartbreak and fear, who stayed even after love got complicated. He watched until the last guest disappeared, until the music faded, until the street went quiet again. Then he turned back toward the truck. He didn't cry this time. He just whispered, "You were always beautiful, baby girl. Even if I couldn't walk you down the aisle, I still saw you shine." Thomas had never been good with words, not the kind that made speeches or swayed crowds. He was a man of tools, not talk. A man who fixed broken engines, not broken hearts. But some things only a father can say, and some wounds only a father's words can reach. A week had passed since the wedding. The house was still, like time had pressed pause. The suit he wore that day still hung by the door. He hadn't had the heart to put it away. His daughter hadn't called. Not a single word. And Thomas didn't know if she even knew he'd come. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper for what felt like hours. A cup of cold coffee by his side. The clock ticking, cruel and constant. Then he picked up a pen. And he began. My dear girl. He didn't rehearse it. Didn't plan it. He just let his heart bleed onto the page. He wrote about her first steps, the first time she rode a bike without training wheels, how she used to climb into his lap after nightmares and fall asleep to the sound of his heartbeat. He told her he had imagined that wedding day 1,000 times, how he'd straighten her veil, whisper a prayer into her ear, and walk her down the aisle with tears of pride. You didn't give me that moment, he wrote, but I still love you with the same full heart. A father's love doesn't shrink when he's hurt. It waits. It forgives. It remembers everything good. He told her he had stood across the street, that he had seen her, that she was beautiful, that her smile had broken and healed him all at once. I'm not writing to make you feel guilty, he added. I'm writing because I want you to know. I was there. I showed up, just like I always have, even when I wasn't welcome. And finally, he ended the letter the same way he had ended every note he'd tucked into her lunchbox as a child. Love you always, no matter what. Dad. He folded it carefully, slipped it into an envelope, wrote her name in shaky letters. Then he walked down the road to the post box, slid it in, and stood there a while, like a man saying a prayer. Days passed. No reply. Then a week. Then 2. He told himself not to hope. But he did. Quietly. Painfully. Completely. And then, one rainy evening, just as the sun was setting behind gray clouds, there was a knock at the door. He opened it. And there she was. Not dressed up. Not put together. Just her. No makeup. Puffy eyes. A sweater 2 sizes too big. Hair in a loose ponytail like she wore it in high school. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, like she wasn't sure if she deserved to be seen. Then, her lip trembled. And in a voice so small it nearly broke him, she said, I got your letter. Thomas nodded. Swallowed hard. I was so wrong, Daddy. He stepped aside, held the door open with one hand, and held out his arms with the other. She collapsed into him like a child, sobbing, apologizing, shaking with years of guilt and the weight of choices she hadn't been brave enough to face. And Thomas? He held her. No anger. No lecture. No, I told you so. Just love. Because love doesn't keep score. Not a father's kind. Grandpa in a calm, measured tone said regret. It's a strange kind of shadow. It doesn't yell. It doesn't chase. It just follows you quietly. Waits in the corners of your good days until you remember what could have been. For Thomas and his daughter, forgiveness came like the rain after a long drought. Quiet. Healing. Necessary. She came back. They laughed again, cooked old recipes, watched sunsets from the porch just like they used to. But no matter how many times they smiled, there was always that one truth between them. He hadn't walked her down the aisle, and she hadn't asked him to. One afternoon, she brought over a photo album. Her wedding pictures. She laid it in his lap like a confession. I want you to see them, she said softly. Thomas paused, then opened the book. Page after page of perfect smiles, expensive flowers, people dressed in joy. His daughter, glowing. But not a single trace of him. Not one photo. Not one chair with his name. She was watching him, eyes full of unshed tears. And then she whispered, I didn't invite you, because he didn't want you there. And I was scared. I thought if I said no to him, I'd lose him. But I lost you instead. And I regret that more than I can explain. Thomas looked at her, his little girl, all grown, trembling under the weight of a decision that never stopped echoing. He put the book aside, reached out, and simply said, regret doesn't ask permission. It just moves in, but we don't have to let it eat everything else. Not long after, she told him the truth. Things with Aaron were not good. The man who smiled for the camera wasn't smiling at home. Eventually, she found the courage to walk away, to start over, to rebuild a life from the pieces. And when her son was born, Thomas's grandson, everything changed again. The first time Thomas held that baby in his arms, he felt the past soften. The ache didn't leave, but it made space for something else. Hope. A second chance. A promise. I missed your mama's wedding, but I won't miss your first step, or your first word, or anything else. Because life doesn't always give you do-overs. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you someone new to love. And that love can turn even the heaviest regret into something worth living for.